In this episode, we're meeting with Julie Meyer, the CEO of Ariadne Capital. Julie, thank you for your time today. As I understand, you graduated from INSEAD as one of their 50 all-time top alumni, and I just wanted to get your views in terms of MBAs and education in general.
Well, the reason why I went to INSEAD is because I had an undergraduate degree in English literature, French, humanities, and that as a multidisciplinary background was really valuable to me in terms of the way that I think. I think it's helped me in the world that I live today, but I wanted the INSEAD degree at age 30 to really help me with the basics of corporate finance, organizational behavior, etc. So for me it complemented. I wouldn't have traded my liberal arts undergraduate degree for anything in the world. It helped me think, but the business degree was perfect after having had about 7 years of experience. But every situation is different. And INSEAD is a fantastic school because of the network of like-minded, internationally motivated alumni that you find yourself in afterward. And I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't have come out of the gate thinking Europe, thinking network of European friends and building First Tuesday if I had gone to some other school other than INSEAD. So for me it wasn't so much a decision to get a business school degree or an MBA. It was about I want to go to INSEAD. It was the only business school that I applied to, and I suppose if I had not gotten in, I'm not sure really that I would have done an MBA. It was really INSEAD, and I think INSEAD is unique. I'm on the board of directors. They gave me that very nice award, and it was a great experience, and I really recommend the INSEAD experience. Business school degrees tend to be focused in different directions, so I can't really speak about business school degrees, but I can speak about INSEAD.
If I had £100,000 in cash right now, would you recommend that I start a business, or do you recommend that I go into MBA school?
It's a good question, and the way that I would refer to that is always invest in yourself. So whether or not it's £100,000, but there would be other things that you could do in terms of investing. It could be about going to business school, it could be about setting up a business, but it could be about writing a book, it could be about traveling to the other side of the world. But the most important thing is that whatever is right for you or for me, that we continue to invest in ourselves. And that's what I tell young entrepreneurs as they're trying to decide this or that. I would say start with the end in mind. So think about 10 years out and work back from there. If you want to achieve that, what kind of things do you want to do? And I was lucky because when I was 22 years old, I went to an open day at INSEAD and I met all of these internationally minded people, and I said, my God, is this business school? Count me in. Mm-hmm. And so from age 22 until age 29, I worked with the vision of that's where I'm going. And so I just worked backwards, and I said, well, INSEAD only brings in people with this kind of profile, so therefore I know what the investment I need to make into myself is. But, there's different goals and therefore different investment that people need to make. But I was fortunate in that I did the deep dive into say, where do I want to be in 10 years' time? And a lot of people just kind of cruise through their 20s, and they don't think. They think, well, I'm 23, I'm 27, I should just be having fun. Actually, those years are hyper important about picking up skills, picking up relationships, and so forth. And what I would say is to stop to think about the adventures of your 20s as opposed to getting to just 30 looking around and saying, what have I learned?
The perception is that America, or more specifically Silicon Valley, is the mecca for entrepreneurship. Why did you set up Ariadne Capital in London? And what are your views on the America, UK, Europe divide?
I think the big news is that the trend is towards all of those people that went to American undergrad business schools out to Silicon Valley and worked in one startup are all going back, wherever going back is. Going back might mean going back to Switzerland, or it might mean Namibia or Iran or Russia or whatever. And there's a diaspora. And that's really cool, because what that means, I do think that we have excellent education in the United States, but I also think that about the education in the United Kingdom. If we can create those connections, whether they're through nationalities or other kinds of cultural groups, and for that kind of educated, I don't use the word elite, but that kind of educated group of people to be focused on lifting the rest of people out of poverty in some cases, that's a great way. Let's leverage business schools to lift people up into the middle class around the world. Obviously, that's what free market capitalism is all about, lifting people out of poverty. So,
which company or which brand do you feel has successfully done so?
In terms of business schools or in terms
In terms of lifting people out of poverty around the world?
Well, I mean, over the past 25 years, since really, well in advance really of the end of the Berlin Wall, it was through, Reagan bringing down the Reagan, Thatcher, and Pope John Paul, the efforts of the people who were able to collapse the Soviet Union and to open up everybody who was behind the Berlin Wall, and now we're seeing other walls fall down around the world, right? So we do know that there's a strong correlation between freedom, democracy, and prosperity. And, the forces of good, I believe, are going to win out over time, but business people are a force for good. How do people stop fighting? Through trade. How do people lift themselves into better lifestyles? Through hard work and business.
What were your career aspirations when you were young? Did you always want to be an entrepreneur and a VC, or is it something that you stumbled upon?
I didn't so much say ever, except, when I was about 6 years old, I remember testing my father, because my father, who's an entrepreneur and worked very long hours, it's not that he wasn't always there, but he used to say just the same things. He used to say, anything you set your mind to, you can do. And it was more or less that, but for 20 years. And so I used to test that quite a lot. And I would say to my dad, well, I want to be an astronaut, and I want to be the president of the United States, just to kind of see whether he was laughing at me in terms of my ambition, and he never laughed. And I think actually I was socialized to become an entrepreneur by virtue of watching my father in his business. He set up a medical practice, so he was a doctor, but he actually set up a medical practice. And I always thought, oh, my dad's a doctor, I go to hospital with him. But actually he set up a medical practice, and that actually was much more formative in the way what I learned, the highs and the lows of entrepreneurship. So I never thought, oh, I'm going to be this. I think internalized and said kind of like, I'm going to be like Dad.
And what was your family's perception of failure versus success? Was there an emphasis in having to be successful and having to outbeat and outwin everybody else, or was there an appreciation of failure?
I'm fortunate that I'm a deeply competitive person with myself, and it really is, the focus is on myself. I don't mean to sound I don't know what, but I don't care what other people do. I care what Julie does. I care about what my unique contribution to the world is. I care whether I'm doing my personal best, and I recognize there's things I'm good at and bad at. And when I would bring home report cards and things like that, if I had a A- occasionally, my mother would say, you can improve that. So there was always a question of how do you do better? And so she taught me, and I taught myself, how to stretch myself. And I learned good discipline growing up. I had an outstanding mother.
Can you name for me the 5 important boxes every entrepreneur needs to tick when they're about to meet a VC?
Yeah. Well, there's a great scene in Moneyball, and Billy Beane is talking to the young guy out of Yale, and they're talking about what it could mean if they fail. And he basically says, if we fail at this, I'm going to be an unemployed 44-year-old, and you're going to be a 25-year-old Yale grad with a great internship. And they kind of look each other in the eye and they say, do you really believe in this? Are we all in? And I think before you go see somebody asking them for money, you got to kind of look at yourself in the mirror and to say, am I all in? Because if this is just something that I'm kind of trialing out, and really I've got my safety net over here and I've got this and so forth, but the VC or the investor who's going to reach into their pocket, and maybe you're not in a position to say, hey, listen, I got 17 grand or I've got 70 or 300 that I'm going to put in. So you're basically saying, I'm not putting in any cash, but I'm expecting you to put in cash. Really what they want to know is, are you all in, right? Are you just doing this until the money's gone, and when it gets tough, you're going to go find a job? And that's not a recipe to just go for broke in a foolish kind of way. But you have to make a decision at some point what it's going to be. You can't be half pregnant. You got to either go for it or not.
So what would you say about part-time entrepreneurship? Because everybody's got different realities. Part-time entrepreneurship where you dip your toes in, or full-time entrepreneurship where you fully dive into the pursuit?
Well, there's different models. Some people have to pay the bills with a job and so forth. I think it's unusual to get somebody to give you money to invest in your business on a part-time entrepreneurship basis. So they typically invest so that you can go full-time, right? Because if you're working 60 hours a week and then doing another 40 on top of that as an entrepreneur, you get tired. And an investor will say, well, hang on, let's not do this part-time entrepreneurship, part-time employment. I'll fund you so that you can go full-time. But, it comes down to there's lots of different ways to win. but you probably have to have a strategy to say in a certain amount of time, I'm going to shift into the full-time mode.
You very often talk about game changers, very, very often talk about game changers. How would you spot or predefine a game changer?
Yeah. So there's market opportunities which are massive. I've spoken about Monetize in my book, Welcome to Entrepreneur Country, and Alistair Lukey is the CEO, who in the year 2002 had the insight to say that the mobile money ecosystem would have to work for everyone if it worked for anyone. Now that sounds like a blindingly obvious statement, but at the time in 2001, you had businesses like SimPay that were just trying to sell banking software in a linear fashion into banks. And basically Alistair was saying implicitly there's a set of stakeholders into this ecosystem. There's banks, there's mobile carriers, there's the individual who wants a lower cost of cash than say what Western Union will give them for transferring funds. And everybody should have an economic benefit or incentive. The business model needs to work for everyone, right? And so I think, the game changers are people who see the shape of an industry. They see how the architecture of a market space are going to work. So there's lots of people who can get a great product out to market or even become profitable as a business, maybe even go into a kind of hyper growth mode. But for me, a game changer is somebody who not only spots the emergence of a market opportunity, but they can actually say, the business model for that emerging ecosystem needs to look like this. And then they have actually a strategy of bringing that to market, and then they actually execute that strategy. And there's just very few people who can do that. Alistair Lukey of Monetize is somebody who has done that. And he is just a phenomenal person. I mean, it is stunning, really, what he's achieved.
Can you name some other companies that Ariadne Capital has backed that have been enormous game changers around the world?
We were an early advisor, so we weren't an investor in Skype, but we were very early. So got a call from the original angel investor, Howard Hartenbaum, and worked with the company through 2004 when it was not at all obvious that Skype was going to be a game changer, except if you had a kind of inkling about the consumerization of technology, that people were going to be experiencing the web as individuals first rather just as business people in the office. And so frequently, what does the web, there's a lot of discussion about the web makes distribution free or cheap, right? Because there's less cost to that. So wherever there are Goliath industries, like the telecoms world in the early 2000s, which has high infrastructure costs and so forth, there's opportunities through IP and internet opportunities basically to undercut. And so it was a bet, it was a big gamble. But because Nicholas and Janice were so knowledgeable about the telecoms, they were the best people to pull the rug out from underneath, the major telco players there and so forth. So I thought it would be a big adventure. We were able to work with them on some business development. 4 of the Ariadne team flipped into the company. And I think it's fair to say that, Skype revolutionized the telephony market, with a very simple statement, free calls on the web, right? So again, the consumer proposition was very, very clear, pulled people into the market.
Julie, can entrepreneurs and VCs lead the road to economic recovery? And there's a perception that there's a lot of money out there right now, but the UK is losing out to Silicon Valley.
That entrepreneurial class of people, is it 5%, 17%, 33%? But the people who bring and build the future, right? The adventurers, the artists, the Christopher Columbuses, the Leonardo da Vinci's, the Charles Dunstones, the Nicholas Sundstrom, they've always been there throughout history, right? Go back 1,000 years, 300 years, they've always been there. So when I say that capital follows ideas, it always has, it always will, I say that with a lot of historical evidence. So when I say that it's going to drive, the structural change that we're going through from horses to cars in this information age to wherever we get to at the end of the next 30 years when the next kind of big bang disruptive technology comes, it's going to be the people who feel that, right? It's going to be the entrepreneurs who see that future are bringing it to us. So we've gone through, if you start at 1971 with the Intel microprocessor, the past 30 years or so have been this installation of new technologies from computing software and internet. Now what we're doing is we're talking about the deployment into large enterprise. And why that's so important is that the entrepreneur is still extremely important, but David with his slingshot is hopping on the back of Goliath. So the economic recovery at this point, we're pulling ourselves out of the slump if, and it's a real important if, because there's different futures. either the corporates who are sitting on a lot of cash right now, they probably have a lot more cash than the venture capitalists, certainly more than government. If they start engaging, Goliath engages with David and lets David run on top of his distribution, we're going to get that deployment into industry faster and really recreate this whole industrial landscape with digital business models and revenue streams. The sooner we do that, the more mass prosperity on the back of the new technologies. If we stumble around with all of the silly stuff that's going on right now, from Eurozone to high tax to too much government and so forth, all we're doing is reducing the prosperity. So there's some real stark choices there. Now, I'm not a big believer that, prosperity only exists, with the American spirit. I think there's smart people everywhere. I think that there's a particular cauldron of bright minds, Stanford University, Silicon Valley, and so forth. But, I come from there. I could have stayed there if I wanted to. Why do I come to London to build here? Is because London has its own ecosystem. First of all, it's at the crossroads, and I would say at the heart of the global community. The three spheres of influence that we have in London are, yes, Europe, Commonwealth, North America. So if I want to be at the center of the universe, I would argue I have to be in London to meet some of the most important industrialists, to meet some of the most financiers. There in London. This is the world city. It's the global city. Does the market ecosystem work here for entrepreneurship as well as in Silicon Valley? I think if we continue to compare ourselves, we'll always say, it's different. I don't want to be Silicon Valley. I want to be different. I want to create that out of London, and I think this is the right and most interesting place to be.
And when you speak about David and Goliath, you recently stated that the relationships between small and large companies are constantly being redrawn. Who do you think stands to gain out of this, the big guys or the small ones?
Yeah. Well, it's a game of asymmetrical warfare, but the battle, the Goliaths assume that they have all the distribution. But, isn't it interesting that David with his slingshot, sometimes with, no assets other than he's willing to work 100 hours a week and so forth, David thinks he'll win, and guess what? David wins, actually, right? In so many situations, he's able to execute. The good thing about David is that the small business entrepreneur, the high-growth tech entrepreneur can focus on small markets. Sometimes those small markets become massive, right? So the big companies, they tend to be lumbered down with inertia. They can't seem to change direction or to pivot or to focus on emerging. The people in those big companies might have insights, but they can't necessarily exploit them. So you need a bit of both. You need the distribution of the Goliaths, but David understands the world's gone network. He understands ecosystem economics. He understands consumer data. So when you get David and Goliath collaborating or dancing, you actually have a real powerful concoction. But again, there's different futures. There's different ways that you can optimize prosperity or not, as the case may be. And again, if we create the right incentives from tax to the rest of it, we can get more of those corporates who are sitting on big balance sheets full of cash to open up and become a kind of open enterprise platform for those Davids. Or they'll just be told by the investment bankers, to buy stuff. They don't need to buy stuff. That we can create open enterprise platforms. Why is that important? Because what is Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, Salesforce, if not an open enterprise platform? If the world is going software, right? If all businesses are being remade by software, either the existing industry, whether or not you're Rolls-Royce or Bauer Media or Paddy Power, unless you also open up and become an enterprise platform and get the Davids, coming over your anthill, then the big companies in Silicon Valley will just continue to steamroll through every industry across health, smart cities, financial technology, broadcast media. Do we really want that? No. I think this is a game of fighting back. I think the carriers, other large industries have a real game to play, but they have to open up. They have to choose the future, which is the embracing of David.
Now let me turn the tables on you. Does Ariadne Capital have an exit strategy?
Ariadne Capital has a 30-year plan. We have a plan to shape this whole deployment of technologies into Goliath, into industry. And we're just going to continue to play as big a role as possible into creating these new digital ecosystems in health, financial technology, broadcast media, smart cities, mobile money. And we're going to build on the assets that we have, which are incredible entrepreneurs that are stuck into Ariadne Capital, our expertise in some of those industries, our deal flow, our ability to build relationships with entrepreneurs, our ability to move fast, think big, start small. And we'll just continue to do that. And we don't need to exit to anyone, right? Are we going to acquire other things along the way? Possibly. Are we going to move into new markets? Absolutely. We're going to align ourselves with the explosion of participants in these new industries rather than just the transactions. And a lot of venture firms and investment banks just want to be in the most important transactions. Great. We're going to align ourselves with the growth and the overall participants, the percentage of the world which is, focused on entrepreneurship, digital innovation.
Is the VC the boss of an entrepreneur?
The VC is never the boss of the entrepreneur. The VCs that approach their work and say, I'm the boss and I'm keeping you under my thumb, are not going to create game changers, right? So the best thing that a venture capitalist or an investor can do is to find the strongest, most, competent entrepreneurs and to approach them as a client, to say, what can I do to facilitate and to make it easier for you? What can I take away? And to be their confidant, yes. To be a sounding board, yes. Not to be, just a cheerleader. But basically, the entrepreneur has to be in the driver's seat. If he or she is, put into board meetings where they have to kind of defend themselves constantly, as opposed to getting real sustenance from their board members, from their shareholders, their investors, saying, these are the problems that I'm having. Mr. Board Member, Mr. VC, what can you do to help me get to the top of Samsung? I need to do a deal with Samsung. These are the problems I'm having. What do you think I'm doing wrong here? But if it's not a relationship of peers, confidant, adding value, then, the world's gone carrot, not stick. If the VC thinks he can hit the entrepreneur over the head with a stick as opposed to incentivizing him and facilitating his success, then you're going to have, very bad dynamics in the boardroom.
The Wall Street Journal named you as one of 30 of the most influential and powerful women in Europe.
I know, amazing. So, kind of, where'd they get that?
It's common knowledge. Why aren't there more women entrepreneurs and VCs? Why are you so different there?
Well, first of all, I think that there are many that don't necessarily make the time. Part of it, I come from a communications background. Marketing and communications is kind of where I cut my teeth in my early 20s. So for me to have conversations about what I think is important, what I believe, is just a natural thing. I slot this stuff in to a lot very easy, whereas a lot of people who are doing my job elsewhere, they either don't make time for it or they have bigger families than I do. They're just busy, Are there women out there that have no public profile that deserve to have one? Yes. But the broader issue of how do we get more women into positions of authority and so forth is, I'm a big believer, and I always kind of say women should build their own cathedrals rather than just trying to break through the glass ceiling. I don't think that you ever win by playing by somebody else's rules. And entrepreneurship is about setting up the rules of the game that you're going to play by. And you live and die by those rules, right? It cuts both ways. It's not just it's a license to be successful. It is also sometimes the rules by which you fail. But at a minimum, you don't have to defend yourself against, what could be a very patriarchal structure inside of a corporation.
Your father was a doctor and entrepreneur, as well as your mother worked for a legal practice. What sort of values did they teach you when you were young that still chimes true now and that you carry with you every time you make a key or non-key business decision? My
family values, or my family heritage, if you will, is one of, we're German family by background. My grandparents came from Germany. Very, rigorous discipline. My mother, frankly, just wants me to be a nice person. So she kind of judges anything that I'll tell her on basically, does this kind of make Julie, am I representing the Meyer family values? Am I being a kind and nice person? Am I bringing good things to the world? Hard work is extremely important in my family. We're a very industrious group of people. The kind of Protestant work ethic rips right through the family. And I think that those are good core values. Very, very strong focus on the family and what your contribution is that you're making to the world. The belief that kind of God gives you talents and you're not supposed to squander them.
Can you please talk to us about your new book, Entrepreneur Country? Welcome to Entrepreneur Country.
Well, Welcome to Entrepreneur Country is my first book, and really I felt for a very long time, entrepreneurs go to a different country every day, and they kind of bond amongst themselves by thinking that nobody could possibly know, what it feels to be an entrepreneur except another entrepreneur who has to live through the near-death experiences and so forth. But I kind of came to realizing in the years of 2008, 9, and 10, as I really thought through what was happening, and I thought, okay, what exactly is happening with this kind of shifting social contract between corporates, the government, financiers, and entrepreneurs, came to the realization that we're all going to entrepreneur country. It's not just that the entrepreneurs going there, but society is shifting, and that there's a new social contract, and the emergence of the freelancer individual capitalist, right, as a major trend, of this David and Goliath dynamic, as government is frankly morally and fiscally bankrupt. There's no evidence that government is a good steward of our money. I look for that evidence, constantly. I'm there to be convinced. And so the idea that as power essentially is dispersed, prosperity ensues. So what does that mean? Local is good. Accountability is good. Numbers-free zones, not good. So where government is spending our money, let's understand exactly what the accounting is. What's the balance sheet and profit and loss of the country? Let's get, engagement into the process of self-governing ourselves. Obviously, we have represented officials. So what Welcome to Entrepreneur Country does, it gives a little bit of my personal story over the past 25 years. How did I come to believe the things that I believe? What was my personal entrepreneurial journey? And then I basically pick out bits of, I talk about the world becoming feminine strength. Economics is trumping politics. Entrepreneurs backing entrepreneurs. The key trends that I see in the market and why I think that we're all going to entrepreneur country.
Julie, do you have any final messages for entrepreneurs that are going to be pursuing a new business but may be a bit hesitant or may be clouded by fears of failure and loss?
Really, it's just about 6 words. Think big, start small, move fast. If you ever stop thinking big as an entrepreneur, it's kind of game over. That's what entrepreneurs do. So you have to constantly think big. Think about how your industry should be structured. Think about how big the problem is that you're solving and what you can do. But you have to start small. Not only because at the beginning you probably are small. You don't have a lot of anything. So you have to start with the basic building blocks and build a strong foundation. But one of the key assets that you have as an entrepreneur is you can move fast. You can decide to pivot very quickly. The market's telling me this. I've heard it now 7 times. I don't need to listen to 14 times. I've heard it 7 times. I can shift my business model. I can shift and so forth. So think big, start small, move fast. And those I find, they're not trivial sayings, but they kind of exemplify what entrepreneurs do. They know how to do a lot with a little. They know how to think big at the same time dealing with the execution and the tactical. But more importantly, they know how to move very, very quickly towards a goal rather than just thinking they do. They execute.